Okay, boys and girls, thank you so much to Gabriella and Nathan for reminding us about that amazing Bible verse. Now, boys and girls, I wonder if you have ever had to wait and wait and wait and wait to get something that you really wanted. Maybe it was a toy, maybe it was a game, maybe there was somewhere you really, really wanted to go and you had to wait a long time for those things to happen. And I wonder how you would feel if when eventually you got the toy or the game that you'd been waiting a long time for, I wonder how you would feel if you were then told you had to give it back. Yeah, that would be a bit confusing, wouldn't it? And you might feel that that was a bit unfair, and you might feel a little bit disappointed and frustrated and maybe confused. Boys and girls, in today's story, as we think some more about Abraham, we're going to be thinking about what happened when Isaac grew up to be a boy. So a wee bit older, because we just learned that he was born last week, but we're thinking today about how whenever he was a bit older and God asked Abraham to give Isaac back. But before we think about this story, and this story, you know, there's a lot of truths in this story that might be difficult to understand and that might be a wee bit confusing, and that's okay, because there are some bigger truths that we need to understand as we come to read more about this story. So the first thing that I want us to think about is God's promise to Abraham, the three things that God had originally promised to Abraham. Do you remember? God had said he was going to give Abraham a new land. God had said that Abraham was going to have lots and lots of children. And God had said that there would be blessing, that there would be a blessing for the whole world through Abraham's family. And those are important things to remember. But our story today is called A Sacrificial Promise. So before we watch our little video clip, I want us to think about this word here. It's the word sacrifice. Now, I wonder if anyone knows what sacrifice means. It's a big word, and if you don't know what it means, that's okay. I'm going to try and explain it now. Sacrifice means to give something up. And it's not just any old thing. When you're making a sacrifice, if you're sacrificing something, you're giving up something that's important to you and something that's valuable to you. And in the Bible, we read about sacrifices. Now, I've got some pictures on this, and you can see that there's a man here with a sheep on his shoulders, and you can see over here that there are some animals, and there's an altar. We call this an altar here, and there are flames. In the Old Testament especially, we read about sacrifices because we know that after Adam and Eve disobeyed God, there was a huge problem, wasn't there? There was the problem of sin. Now, the Bible tells us that God is holy, and that's why we sang our song at the start about God being holy, just to remind us. And the problem is that we are not. The problem is, do you remember sin? The problem is that we all have sin in our lives, and sin needs to be punished because a holy God cannot be around sin. That's important to remember. It's also important to remember how our sin separates us from God. We cannot come to God because of our sin. Now, we know now that because of Jesus, our sin can be forgiven. But in the Old Testament part of the Bible, Jesus hadn't come to earth yet. And so there needed to be punishment for sin. And so people made sacrifices to God. Now let me find my little page. So many pages, boys and girls. Sure, you know what I'm like. So people would make a sacrifice. They would give one of their best animals as a sacrifice to God. And there are two reasons we're going to think about this morning why they would do this. They would do it to say sorry for their sin. They would give something that was valuable to them, something that was important to them. They would give it back to God. They would sacrifice it. They would have to kill that animal, and the blood of the animal would be shed, and that would show God that they were sorry for their sin. And they would also make sacrifices to say thank you to God. When we read the story of Noah, when Noah came off the ark, he built an altar to God to say thank you. To say thank you to God for being faithful, for keeping his promises, and for keeping Noah and his family safe. Now, in the Bible, when we read about sacrifices, people are sacrificing an animal and they're shedding the animal's blood as a way of saying sorry for their sin. But you know what, boys and girls? The sin didn't go away. People kept on sinning and people had to keep on making sacrifices. Okay, so that's an important thing to remember. Now, in our story today, God asks Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. Now, remember, Isaac is his only son. Abraham knows that God has promised him lots of children, and he's waited a long time for this child to be born, and now God is asking him to sacrifice Isaac. We're going to watch a little clip now that explains some more about it, and then we're going to think some more when we come back about this promise and how Abraham trusted God. Even though he didn't understand, even though this was very upsetting and confusing, Abraham trusted God, and there are some important things that we can learn when we come back.